So, welcome to the 82nd episode of the series Decolonizing the Mind. Today, I'm honored to have a good friend from Pakistan, Professor Asad Zaman, who I will introduce shortly. Um, but let me start by giving my view on how the world is changing by the week. And we saw, uh, I think one of the most important things was the Iran-US talks that started last week, um, and where Trump was boasting that he would bomb Iran. And just recently, the New York Article Times uh, put forward the information that even hardliners like the Minister of Defense of the Trump administration and Trump now are not in favor of war with Iran. How come? And my guess is that their military people have told them this would be a disaster. So the New York article says that they told Netanyahu to back down because they don't want to go to war. The second thing is that the visit of Iran's Minister of Foreign Affairs to Putin was very important because what came out of the meeting is that US, China, and Iran operate as a front in the negotiations with Trump on the nuclear deal. It's not just Iran and the US. And then the other important event of last week was the Saudi Minister of Defense visited Iran, and the closer cooperation between those two and uh, 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 one of the Israeli newspapers reported that the Saudi Minister of Defense said that only Muslim unity could bring down the Zionist regime. Was not reported in the Western press. So the long-term argument I'm making in the podcast series is that we are witnessing the rise, not only just the decline of the West, and not only the rise of a new political and economic order, but also the rise of a new world civilization, where it's also about knowledge and how to look at knowledge in this new world civilization. And Palestine is the axis for the birth of that new civilization. And that was the reason that I invited Professor Asad Zaman. He sent me a very interesting article titled Reuters Modernity, A Moral History of Europe's Rise. And a popular version is to be seen in one of his blogs. If you visit his website, which I'm having in the PowerPoint, asadsaman.net, you will find a lot of interesting article from the perspective of a Muslim economist and an expert in the field of econometrics, statistics, and economic theory. And so really I'm so happy that we are joined with a dear friend, Professor Asad Zaman. Thank you so much for joining me, and thank you for sending the article and asking for my feedback. So my first thing is just maybe you could introduce yourself in the way you want, and then let's have a discussion on your article.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me, and I'm pleased that you have honored me by thinking about by talking to me in this podcast. You know, my father taught me something which I been very useful to me in my life, and that is distinguish between the urgent and the important. Urgent is a fire burning that you must put out, but most of us spend our lives fighting fires, and these are never the centrally important things that matter in the long run. So the short run is sharply differentiated from the long run. And so when you talk about the deeper issues, then people who are busy on the front lines fighting fires, they actually dislike it. They think that you're taking attention away from the burning needs of the time. But I know that, so this is for the audience. I know that you are deeply concerned with the foundational issues. So I know that we are on the same page. But and most of the stuff that you're talking about, what's happening today and tomorrow, these are just the waves on the ocean. But at the bottom, we have a story. So, oh, you wanted me to introduce myself, and I didn't do that. Well, let me say that I was, my father wanted me to get the best education. So at the age of 16, I went to MIT. I got my bachelor's in mathematics by 19. And then I went to Stanford for 3 years and got a master's in statistics and a PhD in economics, finishing up at 22. And then I taught in various Ivy League schools for 15 years in the USA. Then I sort of came to the uneasy realization that I am governess. I'm teaching the elite students how to make money and how to oppress and exploit. Remember that there's a very nice novel about this kind of thing, which
Your,
I've
your, your
forgotten.
sound is getting a bit
Oh, the
down.
sound is getting weak. All right.
Yes.
I'll try to speak closer to the phone. Is that better
Right.
now?
Yes.
Oh, good. So,
But I see only the top of your head, not even your eyes.
oh, oh, I
This
see.
is
That's because
better.
I don't have my camera
Oh, I
in
see.
my screen. Let me
Right,
see how
right.
I can get that. So I'm
This
not
is
seeing
good. This is good.
my own face. Okay, that's fine. So I was saying that, yeah, I was actually educating the students to lead the world, which is a ruthless and exploitative and cruel world. That didn't seem like a good thing to do. So I decided to return to Pakistan and have been here for the past more than 25 years now. And I've been thinking about the deeper issues of uh, which I've discussed in the article. So I
Yeah.
hope that's sufficient
Yeah.
as an introduction.
Yeah. Thank you for the introduction. So let's go directly into the issue. What I found interesting. Look, students of economic theory. I studied economic here at Erasmus University in Rotterdam, and then the thing they teach you there obviously is the birth of classical economies with Adam Smith, David Ricardo, Marx and the others, and then later on the rise of neoclassical economy with marginalism. And this is all presented as objective science. And the
Yeah.
case you're making in your article, and which is in the tradition also, I would argue, in Islamic economic philosophy and economic theory, economics is about ethics. It's not even about discovering the laws of nature, but then the social nature, the social society. It is about ethics. But that's the case you're also making, but then illustrating it with the facts of, for example, the rise of the central bank in the United Kingdom. Can you dwell on that?
Yes. Well, let me say that the economics presents itself as a universal set of universal laws. There is a very nice book by Jeffrey Hodgson called "How Economics Forgot History." So economics started out as a historical and quantitative subject, and if you just think a little bit about it, it's obvious that it has got to be this way. I mean, economics in the 20th century is different from economics in the 19th century. And economics of Brazil is very different from the economics of USA. Now, the laws of gravity are the same all around the world, but is it possible really to have an economic theory which works the same for the USA and for Brazil and for Nigeria and for Botswana and for Ceylon? Just doesn't seem plausible. And yet, that's exactly what the modern economics textbooks teach you. And we sort of fall into this trap. So, and the reason that we can't get out of this trap is because the solutions, the answers lie in history, and economics has systematically excluded history from the study of from its domain of concern. So once you are studying universal laws, then history is just an obstacle because it's a set of particular things which happened at particular times. So you can't get universal laws out of history. So
Yeah.
it's sort of so
Yeah,
this
but
is the,
let's take the law of supply and demand,
yes,
right? So every textbooks present this as a objective economic phenomenon. You know, when
yes,
the supply rises, then the price goes down. When the demand rises, then price goes up.
yes,
And I remember reading this book by Mohammed Bakir al-Sardar, or Economics, where he goes into discussion with Adam Smith and argues what you call maximum profit as the driving force behind supply and demand, we call greed, which is an
yes,
ethical value. You see?
exactly,
And he was right. But that holds for a lot of these so-called economic laws, you know, which are
yes,
basically ethical principles, but presented as objective fact. And that is one of the things you argue in your article also.
absolutely, absolutely. Yes, there economics is built on hidden moral foundations. I have a paper on the normative foundations of scarcity, in which I say that the supposedly objective principle of scarcity upon which economics is founded is built on three different normative principles, and these are just hidden in the foundations. And a lot of people have realized this, but um, economics is very deeply entrenched in the it's a sort of the religion of capitalism, and so questioning it is very difficult because yeah, one of the things is that the universities are part of the are embedded in capitalism, and they are too deeply embedded to make radical dissent possible. So there is only a limit to what you can say within the academia. It's very hard to step out of that because
And that
these halls
also
are
also goes for the universities in the global south.
absolutely.
You know,
Uh,
how would you characterize the situation in Pakistan regarding the teaching of economic theory?
well, you see, that's where I faced the dilemma that it's this university education which is sort of the brains trust, and so you can't drop out of it, but also it's very heavily guarded, so you can't get in and change things. So what I realize is that in the north, it is much more difficult. In the global south, only the leading institutions, the top universities, are heavily guarded, and the lower levels, the second rank and the third rank, that's where you can get some traction. And so
Is
that's
it?
what I think. Yes. So that's
So,
what I think that.
oh, you might expect that the top universities would be more critical, and therefore the
mm,
brightest mind there would question things, but that's not the case.
No, they are too deeply entrenched in the embedded within the halls of power. So when I taught at one of the best universities, the students didn't want to listen to this heterodox stuff because they were aiming for jobs in the high-paying jobs in the corporate sector. And if they really started to believe in what I had saying, that this would cause them serious problems.
Mhm.
So in the lower ranked universities, these people are not going to get jobs in top level corporates. So they have less to lose and to listen to the heterodoxy.
So there's a more critical tradition below.
Yeah, they're willing to listen, yes,
Yeah,
definitely.
okay.
But
Fantastic.
even the lower ranks are guarded, but not so heavily guarded, so you can get past the guards.
Yeah. Right. One of the other things which you deal with in your article is the role of violence in the
Hmm.
birth of the economic system, the global economic system.
Yeah,
Um, can you tell us more about your proposition there?
yeah. I think that if we, I think that the central myth which one must counter if you want to get any traction is the idea that the past 2 centuries have been the greatest advance in the world, human civil, and Europe is the most advanced civilization. And the evidence for that is that Europe conquered the globe about at the beginning of the 20th century. Uh, about 85% of the globe had been colonized by the West. So that's proof that the Europeans are the most advanced civilization, they're most rational, scientific, logical, democratic, and every single virtue that you can name. So if we want to counter, I think that the this is a very powerful story which has impressed hearts and minds around the globe, and it's very hard to uh, think around that. If you're convinced of that, then the only way to progress is to follow what the West tells you to do, and then that makes life impossible. So I think that the a central, a critical issue is to counter this story, to find out, to give an alternative, non-Eurocentric answer to the question of how or why did Europe conquer the globe. So that's basically what my paper is about and what my post is about. And I say that basically there are three pillars. First of all, the rest of the world was relatively at peace, while Europe consisted of mostly, um, it's not polite, but we can say barbarians. So they were just continuously fighting each other for centuries. And so that led to the military revolution, documented by uh, Parker, I think is Jeffrey Parker. I have the citations in the book. And somebody else by the name of Huffman. Huffman developed this thesis and analyzed it further and said, explained how Europe was specially suited to develop advances in warfare. But that's only one element of a tripod. I think the central element is the change in morality which occurred, and for reasons which are complex, Europeans abandoned religion, Christian morality, which says that love of money is the root of all evil, and adopted secular morality. According to George Bernard Shaw, lack of money is the root of all evil. So once greed became legitimate, and once the capitalist economy starts, so I think that this transformation from greed being evil and a sin to greed being a virtue and a meritorious activity is documented in Tawny. And then Polanyi gives the other part of the story about the emergence of capitalism. And he talks about how the thesis is complex, but I'll focus on one element. Labor markets are required for capitalism to function. Now, a labor market requires turning human lives into commodities for sale. And once you do that, and basically he documents and he shows the history of how it happened. Once human lives are for sale, then automatically money becomes all important. Money is more valuable than human lives, and you can calculate costs and benefits of conquering and invading and killing by offsetting the loss of lives against the gain in material goods. And in fact, you can see accounts and ledgers in European history which do exactly this kind of accounting, where human lives are just counted in terms of dollars. And in fact, the slaves were collateral for loans, and the fortunes of companies rose and fell according to their success at slave trading. So basically, this um, transformation, and so a number of myths that were created to enable this kind of thing. The Enlightenment played a very important role by setting up the Europeans as the only rational people on the planet, and then saying that rationality is standard of humanity. Everybody else is irrational, and the evidence for that is that they didn't develop science, which is of course a fabrication. But the consequence is that nobody else is really human. So, given that the non-whites are animals, then we can. So the Enlightenment played a very important role in enabling this global conquest. So once there was the military revolution, and then there was this moral revolution where things which were considered evil in all civilizations became acceptable and, in fact, desirable and virtuous.
I see
Uh,
that you deal with Downey and Polanyi in your article, and you also touch. I think this article or another one that I read about Weber and rise of capitalism, and that it was induced by the Protestant ethics, and then and that was, let's say, in the 19th 20th century. But then later in the 20th century you have Rostov, which came with his stages of economic growth, and then argued, as if history doesn't exist, of colonialism, that this
yes,
model of how economies grows is going through these abstract stages,
yes,
where you have five stages, and completely disregard the pillage and the stealing and the enslaving and the rise of the modern world economy, the global economy,
yes,
that was based on the transatlantic enslavement, which
yes,
enabled industrialization, etc. This is all left out of the whole story, and then
absolutely,
it becomes a kind of objective laws of economic growth, and they have the mathematical, formulas that calculates how economic growth is uh, um, stimulated by productivity and capital use of capital, etc., and nothing about exploitation.
absolutely,
And I think uh, when you talk about how the educational system and economic theory, all the economic departments there, they don't they don't train people in understanding economic reality. They train people in justifying economic exploitation by
absolutely, absolutely,
masking the moral dimension. You agree on that, I suppose.
absolutely. I mean, it's actually out there in the open that, and when you study game theory, I mean, rational behavior involves maximizing pleasure, and there are no moral constraints. So economists assume that if to maximize your utility, which means maximizing pleasure or power, if you need to lie, cheat, steal, you will do that. That's rational. That's what they say. So this is what is taught to students, and this affects them, as many papers have shown, that economists are more greedy and selfish, and ruthless than non-economists because they are trained to be like that.
Yeah, we need to have new economic textbooks
Yes,
that yeah,
absolutely.
that teaches the economic reality and how economic process function, including with violence and with power that dictates what we see now. Where is the discussion on tariffs by economists? If you look at the whole tariff discussion is about power. It's not about economic loss.
Yes,
And you don't see liberal economists mobilizing against tariffs as a system that hinders the market performance. There are some in the margin because they are anti-Trump, but when they are there, the tariffs was not invented by Trump. Tariffs were there before all the administration used it, and nobody then came up with a theory that said it doesn't. Although strictly spoken, it wouldn't be in conformity with liberal economic theory. In practice, that is how it worked. But in practice, a lot of things that doesn't work according to economic theory did occur, like the enslavement. How do you get labor in the
yeah,
16th to 18th century where people are forced to work for free? It's
yes,
impossible. But that is what created the world industry now, the global markets and the shipping industry and the production centers for agricultural products. Uh, uh, so, yes, but Islamic economic theory offers an alternative. That is something you argue not specifically in this article, but everyone who
yeah,
studies your websites and your work will see that. Can you dwell on the Islamic
yes,
economic theory as an alternative to
yes.
Western economic theory?
Well, I offer two solutions in this paper, and they are yani, one is to stop. You see, the way you justify exploitation is by looking at only one side of the picture, and that's why also you justify tariffs, etc. You look at your benefits and don't think about what's happening to the others. So I say that recommendation one, let's look at the economics for humanity as a whole. Let's look at the welfare of everybody. And that seems like something which everybody should be able to agree to. It's not why be parochial? Why? So once you do that, then suddenly this whole argument about how these past 2 centuries have represent the greatest advance in human civilization collapses, because once you offset the benefits to the west by the losses to the east, then nothing remains. That's one part. The second part is, if you look at all of economic theory and all of its scarcity, you look at the current defense budgets of the all the nations on the planet, even in the top 10, that money is enough to feed, clothe, house, educate, and provide health care for all of the population on the planet. So the fundamental problem of economics is not scarcity, it's war. And war is just not mentioned in economic theory because it's beyond, because macroeconomics in theory just deals with one nation state. So you can't deal with. And similarly, all the trade theory is concerned with how to maximize advantage to one state relative to the others, and it's not. There's no trade theory which takes into account the combined welfare of all of mankind as a whole. Once you did that, then the entire structure of this business of tariff and trades, etc., everything would look very different. So that's one recommendation. The second recommendation is that economic theory has a very, very primitive and false theory of human welfare. They say that maximizing consumption is what leads to welfare. That's just stupid. It's nonsense. That's not true. We know that individually, and there's a whole field of study which has grown up ever since Richard Easterlin did his research at UPenn on article which he published called Does Money Buy Happiness? And found, unsurprisingly, that the answer is no. After you fulfill your basic needs beyond a certain level, income is just completely unrelated to happiness. So we need a better theory of human welfare, and people have made a lot of progress in developing that. And so basically, welfare comes from friends and family, loving and being loved, social relationships, character traits, and meaning, purpose of life. That's very important in giving you welfare. So these are the things, and of course we can take an Islamic perspective on that, but there's no need to for. I mean, these are concepts which are universally understood, and Islam has a specific characterization. But I think that so these 2 points are, I think, critical if we want to develop an alternative. One is to think of the welfare of humanity as a whole, and the second is to understand human welfare doesn't lie in increasing consumption. That's one of the important things of Polanyi's message, that basically the capitalism got started via the Industrial Revolution, which enabled people to make huge amounts of excess products. Now, in a normal, a non-crazy society, excess production is of no use, because I mean, the goal of our life is not economic activity. There are many goals. You can write literature and philosophy and poetry, and you can cultivate different kinds of skills, spiritual and athletic, and these are all parts of human flourishing. But collecting money has never been, except in this crazy Western idea, it has never been an idea that has been considered virtuous. There's no other civilization. In fact, no civilization is the better way to say it. No civilization on the planet has ever considered accumulation of wealth to be the goal of life.
Yeah, I think this, if you apply these two propositions to economic theory, then we would teach students, let's say the first one, students are learning already in the first year of economic theory, David Ricardo's theory of comparative costs, meaning
Yeah,
that comparative trade is based on how relatively a country produces most effective, most efficient in one product, and then based on that efficiency, they could trade products. In reality, that never existed. He takes the example of Portugal and Britain, but never mentioned the colonies where they stole all the goods. They never traded it. And the other thing is the rise of the marginalism in economic theory, which goes to the second point you're making, that what is the purpose of human life? And what they would argue is to get the best in marginal utility, so the
yes,
pleasure, etc. But that kind of theory that reduces human behavior to utility, to pleasure, uh, is a very narrow-minded view of mankind, of humankind. Um,
absolutely,
and that taking your proposition and use that in a way to criticize economic theory, that people understand that what is presented as objective economic laws and theories are just something which is unique in this civilization, where greed has become, as you mentioned, something worthy to aspire. While in other
absolutely,
society they would say it's not a good thing. Even if people do it, it's not seen as something good. Yeah?
absolutely,
And now it's embedded in economic theory that it is good and even objective.
absolutely. This is actually, I mean, one has to understand that economics theory is weaponized. This comparative advantage was used to burn industries and destroy them in India. India was, as you know, more advanced industrially. It used to have about more than 25% of world industrial output at the early stages of colonization, and that went down to 1%. England learned a lot of industrial techniques from uh, India, and they actually shut down industries because they said it is your comparative advantage lies in production of raw materials. So you export your cotton fibers to us, even though they had a more advanced cotton industry, and we will turn them into shirts and then we will send them back to you for you to wear. And that's what actually Gandhi protested against, and he started this Khadr movement where they had destroyed all the spindles, and they were taking all the best thread. So he made this coarse cloth which could be spun by hand, and he said that we should wear this. And also he protested about the salt and said
Yeah.
that let's take salt from the ocean instead. But this is all workings of comparative advantage. So
Yes.
it's also theory is weaponized in the sense that comparative advantage used to tell us in the poorer countries to stick to producing primitive raw materials and not try to industrialize. And the only countries which managed to break out of this trap were the ones who broke out of the capitalist mold and ideology and did their own thinking and planning and economics.
Yeah.
First Russia and China, and then East Asia, they also broke all of the laws of growth, neoclassical, in order to achieve their miracle as documented by the World Bank. So, economic theory has been weaponized to prevent development. Anybody who follows it will never be able to develop, will never be able to grow economically. They will remain trapped in debt forever.
Okay, great. Thank you for your contribution. I hope that one day the other so-called non-top universities in Pakistan might produce the professors that write the new textbooks for the new economic theory based on the things we are discussing now. Thank you so much.
You're most welcome, and thank you very much for inviting me.
All right. So next week we'll continue with the podcast, and I hope in the future to be able to pick your brain on other issues that we're discussing. Thank you, Asad, and
Great.
have a
It
good
was
day.
wonderful talking to you, and your book on the decolonization of knowledge is really brilliant and goes very deep into fundamental issues.
Yeah.
Importance. Thank you.
Okay. Have a good night. Bye.
All right. You too.